Um, Good morning, everybody. My name is Maria Holden. Let me introduce myself. Um, and let me take us to the first slide too. Here we go. Um, I have spent my career in preservation. When I retired about a year ago, I was responsible for the preservation of the collections of the Office of Cultural Education, which includes the New York State Museum, New York State Library, and Archives. I have worked for over 30 years prior to that last position for the New York State Archives and have a lot of experience moving archival collections. My experience started in around 2004 when the archives undertook a major facility renovation and we had to move collections, tens of thousands of cubic feet from various locations, temporary storage locations in our building to the renovated facility. I also managed over time the archive's high volume acquisition program for 15 years. And then today's topic, the moving of the historic court records from New York City to Albany. That's the most recent move I was involved in. That was in 2017, and I'm really excited to tell you about it. The State Archives is a big collection. We have over 250 million records. It's a big organization with a large facility, budget, and staff. And I recognize that many of you are from smaller size organizations and that your environment is very different from ours. My aim today is to make our experience and lessons scalable to your situation. Like most government archives, we don't randomly collect. We acquire records from state agencies according to schedules that trigger transfers to us after the records are no longer used by the agency that created them. This is after a process called appraisal that determines the research value of the records. So records with high research value come to us, come to the state archives from agencies at a rate of about 3,000 to 4,000 boxes per year, often in large batches. So the archives is constantly moving collections and growing rapidly. Besides preserving our holdings in our main and offsite facilities, we provide access to them in our research room and online, where we have millions of images available between our website and ancestry.com. So in late 2016, when we negotiated the transfer of some 2,000 boxes of historic significant court records from Lower Manhattan, the move didn't seem like a huge deal. We move records all the time. But this was different. The transfer was from the unified court system, and it required a special transfer agreement. The collection was in New York City. It was not in Albany. It had been held there for centuries and administered by the county clerk there. That's a local government, but the records didn't belong there. The appraisal of the records by court's leadership confirmed that they belong in the state archives because of their statewide scope. So a memorandum of understanding and transfer agreement were prepared by the Unified Court System and the State Education Department, of which the archives is part. With the agreement approved, we turned to the physical move. This was their home. It's a beautiful Beaux-Arts building designed to be a courthouse and repository. It's the Hall of Records at 31 Chambers Street in New York City, home to the New York Surrogates Court and the New York City Municipal Archives. At its opening, it was a state-of-the-art facility. Today, it doesn't work so well for record storage and access. The storage systems are antiquated, at least on the 7th and 8th floors where the records to be moved were located. The space is very hard to navigate with narrow aisles, small elevators, and no loading dock, not an ideal place from which to move tons of records. And not surprisingly, we found the records to be in extremely poor condition. They were suffering near death by poor environment. There was no air conditioning until the last couple of years when portable units were added. The heat in the winter was very dry, and for centuries, the records were exposed to coal combustion products in the air. Just imagine New York City in the 19th century and the air quality or lack thereof. The effects of these agents of deterioration were shocking. Let's take a closer look at the records. Archival records of New York's unified court system contain unique and valuable information about court operations, litigation trends, judges' decisions, people's rights, and the overall impact of the courts on New York society since the 17th century. They often provide the only documentation of ordinary people, including those who are marginalized, especially in the colonial and early national periods. Many historical records of New York's courts have been lost over time. So the transfer of these 2,000 cubic feet of records of the Supreme Court of Judicature and the Court of Chancery from the New York County Clerk's office to the State Archives was a really important accomplishment. Together with court records that the State Archives acquired in 1982 from Queens College, this new acquisition has resulted in the largest and most significant collection of court records from the colonial and early statehood periods in New York and possibly any state. Let's talk about the volume of the records. It was about 2,000 boxes or the equivalent thereof, including 875 cubic foot cartons of historical records. These boxes are actually 1.2 cubic feet, so I think 2,000 is a slightly underestimate, but it's approximately correct. So we had the 875 cartons, 200 smaller boxes containing paper records. So all boxes contain mostly paper-based loose records, many of them folded. We had 250 portfolios of parchment rolls. These were sort of packaged parchment rolls up to 38 inches long, about 13 inches wide. We had thousands and thousands of parchments contained in these portfolio sandwiches, as we called them. We had 600 plus oversized historical books. And so you can see that, the volume was great. The variety of formats was great, with parchment rolls, bound volumes, folded papers, and I didn't mention the index cards that we also moved, a huge quantity of index cards. We also moved some rolls of microfilm, but the bulk of the records were parchment and paper. Most collections were in containers, but vignettes like this were not uncommon. The condition of the records was very poor. As I said, the records were dirty, brittle. There was iron gall ink damage. Most of them had been executed in iron gall ink, and there was a lot of corrosion of the paper where the ink was. There was a lot of rodent damage, especially to the parchments, evidence of mice, rats, and other critters. Let's take a closer look at some of these formats. These are the parchment sandwiches. These are parchment rolls that were flattened and sandwiched between two sheets of board and secured with twill tape in an earlier conservation project. We had some 250 of these sandwiches, thousands and thousands of parchments. And as I said before, these were between 3 and 4 feet long. You can see that the housing is protective, it protects the parchments to some extent and keeps them flat, but the edges of the parchments sometimes extend beyond the confines of the boards, and they are vulnerable. Some of the parchments were even longer. We had thousands of bundles of paper records previously stored like this in Willis files. Fortunately, most of these had been rehoused by the unified court system and placed in flat storage boxes. As I said, the collection was very dirty. Here's a very thick layer of dust on some of the paper records. And most of the paper documents were severely embrittled because of the long-term exposure to coal exhaust, dry heat, no air conditioning, high humidity. I mean, they were really damaged by the environment in which they were stored. Here are more brittle and physically damaged records, and I cannot overstate the degree of damage caused by their poor environment. I had never seen anything like it. This is a typical view of the stacks in which we worked. Note the tight aisles and high shelves. And in the back, you can see the built-in sliding ladder that provided endless fun for those of us who worked in this space. The collection to be moved included 438 bound volumes of Supreme Court judgments, plus another couple hundred volumes. Note the red rot on these 19th century bindings and missing volume number labels, which posed a challenge. Red rot is the powdering of vegetable tanned leather covers caused by exposure to high relative humidity and air pollution, and also contributed to by the tanning method used on the leather. It's very common in government archives. Finally, we had nearly 1 million index cards to move. These were early 20th century indexes to the records. They're incredibly important because they were the only way to get into the records, the only thing like a finding aid. Looks easy compared to the other formats we've seen, but rehousing them for the move was very labor intensive. So what 3 things must be in place before you start a major move? Good intellectual and physical control. You need to know what you're moving and how much, because you need to be able to track every container. Without these controls, security of the collection is at risk. Second, there needs to be an approved transfer agreement and documentation of that. If a transfer of ownership of the collection is involved, like in our move, you need to document that. And finally, a solid plan of work. How are you going to do this? Who's going to do it? When? How much is it going to cost? Thanks are due to the unified court system, especially our colleague Jeff Huth, recently retired Chief Records Officer, for initiating this transfer and preparing the records for the move. I must also commend the unified court system for achieving good intellectual and physical control of the records before our involvement. They did a lot of rehousing and created a container level inventory of collections being moved. Most records were in containers and most containers were labeled. It was a huge job, and I know it took many years and lots of staff to pull it off. That inventory, which is pictured here, that was prepared by Jeff Huth, formed the basis of our shipping list. Here's an example of their inventory sheet. They were sort of salmon pink, always easy to spot. You'll see them a lot in the slides. The staff, Unified Court System staff, produced 1 sheet for every volume, box, or sandwich. Okay, reality check. What if you have a collection to move that is not as well described or housed? Can you move collections that are not adequately housed or protected? No, it would be irresponsible to do that. But can you move collections that are not as fully inventoried or described? Technically, yes, but you need to establish a robust system for tracking the containers that you move. Your containers need to be counted and labeled with unique identifiers for tracking purposes. For example, if you have a series of 50 boxes, you could label each box with a series number and then the box number, like 1, 2, 3, etc., up to 50. We had a comprehensive transfer agreement in hand when we began planning. Not only did it include the terms and conditions of the transfer, but also it included that container level inventory that I told you about as an attachment. So that was very helpful to us. Don't mind the bottle in the picture. This was found in the stacks while we were moving. Here is our shipping list. It's in the front left of the slide. It was our Bible through the weeks of the move. It's a spreadsheet that we created from the container / volume level inventory. We linked this spreadsheet to our container management system, which enabled us to generate container labels with barcodes for easy location tracking. There are ways to track locations that are non-electronic. You can do it, and been thinking about this, and I think the forms that many of us have created as part of our disaster planning efforts for tracking collections that are removed from storage and sent to freeze drying or freezing, those tracking forms or versions of them would work very well for tracking the move of records in a real move. We can provide an example of one of those after the presentation in the resources that we put together. The last requirement for a successful move is a detailed plan that anticipates and spells out every step. Let's take a closer look at the components of our plan and how we carried it out. Ours started with a couple of one-day visits to the courthouse to survey the collections to be moved. We mapped out locations of the collections. They were on the 7th and 8th floors. We made maps and marked up floor plans with collection locations. We assessed rehousing and labeling needs, of the material being transferred. We identified those collections that we would need to rehouse on site, including the card files, the volumes, and the parchment sandwiches. We also measured collections, the ones that we needed to rehouse, so that we could purchase right size containers. And there's more on that to come. We met with Henry Chamorro, who's pictured on the left here. He's the facility manager. With Henry, we talked about navigating within the building, work hours, building security. We talked with Henry about his experience with movers and moving companies. We talked about elevator capacity and availability. There were 3 small elevators that are too small to hold pallets and loading, what do you call them? Flatbeds and pallet jacks. So we were really limited in our methods because of the elevators. We also talked about where the moving trucks could park and when. The staffing plan was really complicated. The work location was off-site, pretty far away from Albany, would require time away from home for our staff, which would be hard for staff with family responsibilities. We knew the work would be physically demanding. It involves a lot of lifting and climbing. We also knew that archival skills would be needed, in tracking collections, describing collections, identifying them. So it was, we needed a well-rounded person to carry this job out. We came up with a rotation of 5 to 6 staff per week for 3 weeks, Monday through Friday. And this is how we came up with this plan. We knew we had about 2,000 containers, about 2,000 cubic feet. In preliminary talks with a mover, we figured we would need 3 truckloads. And I'm talking large box trucks, not tractor trailers, because tractor trailers are too tall for our loading dock here in Albany. We ended up actually using 5 trucks, but sticking with the schedule of 3 move days. We knew we would need several days to prepare each shipment. Each shipment would include about 650 boxes or containers. We were thinking about the work involved, the labeling with barcodes of every container that we would need to do, housing and packing beyond the housing that had been done. We knew it made sense to load the truck on Friday mornings because according to Henry, that's when fewest members of the public were in the building. So what we came up with was a schedule of 5 to 6 staff working Monday through Friday in New York City, preparing the records for the move, spending the night there, those 4 nights, and then sending a full truck up to Albany on Friday morning. We put out a request for staff volunteers so that we could build our teams, and we had not a lot, but definitely enough very enthusiastic participants. And I think one of the wonderful outcomes of this project was that it brought together teams of staff who don't normally work together. And that was unexpected, and really, it was a lot of fun working with the staff who participated. We found an economical but nice hotel in Brooklyn, a quick subway ride away. So that's what we did. And we worked hard every day for the 3 weeks that we were in the city, preparing the shipments for the Friday departure for Albany. Here is our first team. This is in late December of 2016. Our team is sitting out a fire drill, not because we wanted to. We tried to evacuate, but we were told to stay put, so we didn't break any rules. Check out the architectural features, the relief, the female face around the stairs, above the stairs, the purpose-built cabinetry, the lights, the mosaic floors, the marble everywhere. It was really an incredible, beautiful building. We first heard about our trucking contractor from Henry, the facility manager. The contractor, Smart Move, had done a lot of records move for the Unified Court System, but I don't think they'd done any that involved the travel or the historic nature of our collections. Fortunately, Smart Move was on state contracts, so the process was fairly easy and quick. We used a template required by the Office of General Services for identifying our specifications, but the components of this template, I think, would work just as well for non-government organizations too. We have the contact, that was me, the location of the records, pre-move, the new location, description of the material to be moved, pertinent details, which are very important. We'll talk a little bit more about those, the dates, a verification form confirming that a site visit happened. And this was a visit of the vendor, Smart Move, and the building manager, and the state archives. And finally, the bid proposal form that the vendor, Smart Move, submitted. So this is what all the pieces that went into the contract. I'm just noticing that I might have do I have a question? Oh, pest management. We can talk about that at the end. Sorry about that. Sorry, I missed that. So pertinent details. Remember that section. Hold on a second. I've got to get rid of the. And we had this section in the contract that gave us an opportunity to go into greater detail about some of the special sort of attributes of this move. Current facility was one special thing. It could not accommodate the palletizing of boxes in the building. So any palletizing or shrink wrapping would have to happen on the moving truck. And the facility could not accommodate pallet jacks or large flatbeds. The contractor tasks we defined very clearly, and this is what they were. The movers were to move boxes from the 7th and 8th floors of the New York City facility to the street level using available elevators. Remember, no pallets. They were to put the boxes and volumes on the truck and then transport the collections to the Cultural Education Center in Albany, our facility, to the loading dock and to unload the truck. Finally, we made very clear The fragility of the records required great care in handling, that the records were historically significant, and that experience moving historic court records was preferred. And all of those pieces were in the contract. Concurrently with the moving contract and team building, we did a close review of the inventory to plan for housing and packing. We had really good data in the inventory and also that we had collected from our pre-move visits. So let's review again the collection that we had to move. We had 4 discrete and diverse categories based on format. We had the 600 plus oversized volumes, the 250 parchment sandwiches, over 1,000 records boxes, both cubic foot and about half that, and 1 million index cards, which ended up being 600 shoe boxes. Packing decisions were based on vulnerability and condition. You know, we had the red rot, the embrittlement, they were really big factors. Also efficiency, we had very little time to do this rehousing. We had 3 work weeks to prepare the collection. We knew that we weren't going to be doing any custom rehousing. So we followed a couple of guiding principles. First, to provide 2 levels of protection for most collections. And I'm going to go into that in greater detail in a second. And whenever possible, we purchased ready-made containers that were right-sized from the get-go for the collections to house. For example, we used right-sized polyethylene bags for all the volumes, bins to house the smaller containers. We did make compromises. Our shoe boxes for the index cards were real ladies' shoe boxes. Let me explain our first rule of thumb, the 2 levels of protection. Here's an example. We placed volumes within right-sized polyethylene bags and then bins. And you can see how we did that with this volume that has red rot damage. Note the inventory sheet that is with the item within the bag. Here's a closer look. Pile of bagged volumes. And finally, bagged and labeled volumes. These ones have the barcode labels on them, placed in bins, which provided the second level of protection. The bins were barcoded as well, so that we can link the smaller containers, the bags, to the larger bin location. This made it possible for us to track individual items and sort of aggregates of items. For paper records in cartons, we use the existing boxes, but put new barcode labels on the container. So for every container, whether new or existing, we placed a barcode label. What to do with those 250 parchment sandwiches? They were dimensionally stable, not too fragile, but they had those vulnerable edges. So we bagged them in custom bags and then placed them in right-sized polypropylene bins. And here's a video that shows the process. Sandwiches delivered to staff. Wipe off some of the surface dirt. Slide it into the bag. Seal the bag. The label has been added and now it's placed in the bin. finally, those million index cards. We place them in these shoe boxes. Here we miscalculated the time required. Moving them from file drawers to the boxes took way longer than we expected. And simply constructing the 600 shoe boxes did too. I mean, it took hours. We barely got this done on time. This was done, we were still working late into the Thursday before the final journey of the truck to Albany. See how our bins serve as repositories or locations for lots of smaller containers. We place the loaded shoe boxes in these huge cardboard bins. It's Thursday night. These bins are now ready to be moved to the ground floor on Friday morning, when the contractors will arrive to take them down via the elevators before the building opens. And just an example of how we use the barcodes to document their movement. Finally, on the first of 3 Move Fridays, the truck arrives at dawn. Archive staff assemble in the loading area with collections that had been moved to the street level by the contractors. Remember, this is an old building and perhaps the densest part of the city. There was no loading dock. It's hard to find parking, but we did. And only stairs to the street, except for this tiny elevator on the right, which was designed for wheelchairs. But we used it, were able to use it for some boxes. And up the ramp to the truck and ready for the trip to Albany. It's easy to focus on the launch, the maiden voyage, and overlook the details of arrival at the destination. You need to plan for the arrival of your collection in your work plan. Who's going to unload the truck? What equipment will be needed? Is there a landing space? Will your elevators accommodate the containers? Where will they be stored? If you have contractors like we did, where does their job end and ours kick in? When the records arrived in Albany, our contractors unloaded the trucks and palletized the boxes per the contract, and thus completing their role. That was it for their job. Then our staff took over and moved the pallets to a space we had found for temporary storage on an upper floor. We had a big open space. And thankfully, the elevators at home were big enough to accommodate the pallet jack and the pallet. Here is a really great video clip produced by a local news station that packs the Move Day events into 2 minutes. The court records are now in their new home in the Cultural Education Center here in Albany, in clean, climate-controlled stacks where they will be preserved and accessible. Recently, we conserved a subset of them, of these records, through a Save America's Treasures grant, and that's just the beginning of their introduction to the research community. It's hard to believe it's been nearly 5 years since the move. I think those of us who did the New York City shift would agree that it was a lot of fun. It was a high point of my career, for sure. The camaraderie and sense of accomplishment were really special. And the press and publicity, starting with the article on the front page of the New York Times, was amazing and a gift. As I reflect on the project and critical success factors, I keep returning to the value of good intellectual and physical control, without which the security and integrity of a collection is at risk in a move. The importance of physical protection throughout every step in the process, and flexibility. There will be hiccups, but you can make adjustments and still maintain control and protection. In hindsight, I think we pulled off a pretty smart move. Sorry. And that is the end of the presentation. I see that there are a bunch of questions and I can take a stab at them. First, Cole asks, would love to hear about the pest management mitigation if it doesn't end up being touched upon. Okay, there was evidence of rodent infestation. I didn't see any evidence when we surveyed the collection and actually rehoused the collection of insect infestation. It may have been too hostile an environment for insects, but we handled the records as we accessioned them. We did some rehousing here. Many of them were reviewed in the conservation lab, and we found that we didn't need to do any mitigation of the pests. I believe the pest damage was quite old. Okay, Simon asks, would it be possible to have a certificate of participation? I'll leave that to Dipsney. Oh, follow-up email. Oh, it looks like the video didn't have sound. I'm sorry about that. Yes, we will definitely, the next question has to do with the PowerPoint. We'll make a copy of it available to you, and also the pink inventory sheet, definitely. And I can also provide you with specifications for the software and hardware that we used. Thank you. I don't know who was wearing the long black, the archivist tee, but it might have been Claire. Oh, I'm glad that the presentation was helpful. And, you know, Dipsney staff know how to get a hold of me if you have any questions, and also staff of the archives who participate in this. We didn't have there was not evidence of mold. I think there was some staining that may have been caused by mold in the distant past. But there was no active mold on the collections. And again, we examined them very carefully. There's Claire explaining her apron. It is really a great apron. I'm glad people are interested in it. Are there any other questions? Does red rot present a health hazard? I hope not. Not that I know of, but whenever records have particulates that are generated by them, it's probably a good idea to wear a mask. I don't, you know, I think like an N95 would be fine. N95s are good for mold and other particulates, you know, in relatively small, you know, quantities. But I think probably it would be safe especially if you have allergies, to wear like an N95 mask with red rot. Good luck, Mary, with your move. That sounds really challenging, but modern building, should be, I'm sure it's better designed for your collections. Not a question, Anastasia. Okay. And let's see, what information? Oh, information on the barcodes. For the items barcode, it would be series number, box or volume number. The larger container barcodes, I think they just identify the bin as a location, to which we are assigning all these smaller items. I'm not an expert on this, and we can make sure that, the information that we share about our specifications answers that question. Can you explain the elements that were used for the shipping sheet from the inventory? I don't have an example of it on hand, but again, it would be series number, item number, and that would be box or volume or sandwich. And then I think we had location, the original location for the items. We had a checkoff to indicate, the various activities that were carried out, like labeled, moved, packed, sent. That's what I'm recalling, but I think that probably the best thing for us to do is to share an image of that shipping list so that you all can see it. We'll make sure to have the resources available via the DPSNY website. Thank you, Vanessa. It's good to hear from you. Would we use the same polyethylene bag system for textiles? I feel like textiles might need some more support. Remember that this parchment sandwiches and the bound volumes have structure. If textiles had structure, I think it would be okay. I don't think you would want to use polyethylene long-term for their storage, but for a move, it could be acceptable, but I would defer to a textile conservator on that one. There may be a reason not to. So I think we should find out from an expert. It looks like that's it for the questions. So Anastasia, ready.
Great, thank you so much, Maria. I think I speak for most attendees that we thoroughly enjoyed your presentation today. If you all did enjoy today's presentation, would like to learn more about DPSNY and our other services, please check out our website, dhpsny.org. I'd also encourage you to take a moment. You'll receive an evaluation at the end of this via email. And please let us know what you liked and what you would also like to see in the future. We listen to what you need. Thanks again to everyone for attending. Thank you to the DPSNY team for helping cover this webinar. And thank you to Maria for sharing this great story, great experiences. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.